Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to the news summary for day 396 of the war in Ukraine. You are listening to The Account. Today is the 9th anniversary of the creation of the National Guard of Ukraine. Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces Valery Zaluzhny and Commander of the Ukrainian Joint Forces Serhiy Nayev both congratulated and thanked the soldiers for their service. Today I have one extra segment regarding the reactions to Russia's announcement to deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus. Also, the Institute for the Study of War's assessment is rather long today. All other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, including updates on Orlando Bloom visiting and a petition to make May 20th the day of the Mariupol defenders, the occupied territories, with an update on the death of Dmytro Lysytsky, Russia and Belarus, containing updates on the alleged UAV attack on Tula region in Russia, and the international developments, including an update on Ukrainian soldiers completing their training in the United Kingdom. Before we start, though, the flashpoints along the front. Bakhmut. Russia reportedly made minimal advances in Bakhmut, but nothing major. However, the Russian offensive is more or less at a standstill. Ukraine also reportedly managed to push Russian units back from positions along the MO3 highway during a counteroffensive. Serhiy Cherevati, spokesperson for Ukraine's Eastern Military Command, reported today as well that Russian assaults have reduced and the situation in Bakhmut has stabilized. Avdiivka. Geolocated footage suggests that Russia controls much less territory south of Avdiivka as previously assumed. Ukraine seems to be in control of fortifications north of Spartak and repelled attacks in the area. There have been quite a lot of Russian airstrikes in and around Avdiivka lately. This would suggest problems with Ukrainian air defenses. The head of the Office of the President, Andriy Yermak, reported another airstrike on apartment buildings today. And to start the news segment, a look at some of the international reactions to Russia's plans to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus, reported yesterday. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Germany said that Russia was further attempting nuclear intimidation. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Poland has called Russia's intention a step to draw Minsk deeper into the cogs of the Russian military machine. Josep Borrell, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, sees it as a threat to European security. Vice President of Bulgaria, Ilyana Iotova, has called for the resumption of peace talks with Russia. NATO considers the strengthening of Russia's nuclear rhetoric dangerous and irresponsible. The Minister of Defense of Lithuania, Arvydas Anušauskas, stated that the international society should not be distracted by Putin's statements about the placement of nuclear weapons in Belarus, because protection of a NATO country against the threat of such weapons is guaranteed regardless of its location. The US Department of Defense said on Saturday that there are no indications that Russia is preparing to use nuclear weapons after Putin's statement. Oleksiy Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, believes that this will bring Belarus closer to destabilization as it has been taken as a nuclear hostage. Both Mikhailo Podolyak, the advisor to the head of the Ukrainian President's office, and the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs stated this is a violation of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. The Foreign Ministry also called on the UN Security Council to convene and send a signal to Lukashenko. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. The number of people killed as a result of a missile attack on the city of Zaporizhzhia on March 22nd has increased. An 18-year-old victim died in the hospital. There are now 10 victims. A petition calling for May 20th to become Mariupol Defenders Commemoration Day has garnered more than 25,000 signatures in 2 days. Actor Orlando Bloom, known for his roles in The Lord of the Rings and Pirates of the Caribbean, visited Ukraine today as a UNICEF Goodwill Ambassador. In Odesa Oblast, a Russian sea mine washed up on the coast near the city of Odesa during a storm. According to a spokesperson of the administration, the incident took place in the village of Sychavka of the Yushny territorial community in the Odesa district. The mine has reportedly detonated after hitting the coastal structures of a recreational area and a pier for small boats. Several buildings were damaged. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. According to journalist Yuri Butusov, Dmytro Lysytsky, the commander of the 1st Assault Battalion of the elite 247th Assault Regiment of the Russian Armed Forces, was killed in Ukraine today. Lysytsky played a significant role in the Battle of Ilovaisk in Donetsk Oblast in 2014, where he commanded a battalion tactical group of the 247th Regiment. He ordered the attack on Ukrainian troops that were trying to break through the Russian encirclement in Ilovaisk, 15 kilometers east of the regional capital of Donetsk. In total, 368 Ukrainian soldiers died during the Ilovaisk massacre, which lasted from August 6 to August 31, 2014. In 2015, he was awarded the title Hero of Russia for his service in the war against Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin has spoken about his trip to occupied Mariupol on March 19th, which he called a working visit, and said that he felt the mood of the city's residents. The head of the Crimean parliament, Vladimir Konstantinov, has expressed his belief that one of the conditions for ending the so-called special military operation is for the city of Odesa to come under Russian control. Odesa must be under our control, have Russian status or neutral. The main thing is to be under control, Konstantinov told RIA Novosti. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. A massive explosion occurred today in the Russian city of Kiryevsk, Tula Oblast. The Russian Ministry of Defense accused Ukraine of using a Tu-141 Strych drone to attack Russian territory. Russian authorities reported that 16 residential buildings, of which 10 are private houses and 6 apartment buildings, were damaged. Footage of a 5-meter-deep crater was shared on social media. The Commander-in-Chief of the Norwegian Navy, Rune Andersen, has expressed concern about submarines of the Russian Navy operating in Norwegian waters. According to him, the submarines are modern, quiet, and equipped with sophisticated missiles and could therefore pose a threat to strategic facilities in the US and Europe. Russian state media stated the Commander-in-Chief is scared of the newest Russian submarines. Andriy Demchenko, spokesperson for the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine, reported that slightly more than 4,000 Russian troops are currently stationed in Belarus. This figure is less than half the number of troops Russia had in Belarus in January. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. Hungary advocating for a ceasefire in Ukraine does not mean accepting that Russia would keep the territories it currently occupies, the Hungarian foreign minister said in an interview. The government of North Macedonia will consider the decision to transfer 12 Mi-24 combat helicopters to Ukraine at a meeting on March 29th, after the General Staff has completed an analysis of the proposal. The second group of Ukrainian artillerymen is completing the training session to master the 155mm AS-90 self-propelled artillery howitzer in the UK. The Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, will push for a fair peace in the war in Ukraine that included territorial integrity during a state visit to China next week. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting as usual with the UK Ministry of Defense. Since the start of March 2023, Russia has likely launched at least 71 Iranian-designed Shahed series one-way attack uncrewed aerial vehicle (OWA) UAVs against targets across Ukraine. These attacks followed a 2-week pause in OWA UAV attacks in late February 2023. Russia has likely started receiving regular resupplies of small numbers of Shahed OWA UAVs. Russia is likely launching Shaheds from 2 axes, from Russia's Krasnodar Krai in the east and from Bryansk Oblast in the northeast. This allows Russia flexibility to target a broad sector of Ukraine and decreases flying time to targets in the north of Ukraine. It is also likely to be a further attempt to stretch Ukrainian air defenses. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War, which today is rather long. The Institute considers the latest interview of Russian President Vladimir Putin, in which he mentioned the deployment of nuclear weapons in Belarus, the production of 1,600 tanks, and the fact that Ukraine is using 5,000 shells a day, while the US can only produce 14,000 to 15,000 shells a month, as an information campaign aimed at undermining Ukraine's morale and the West's willingness to support Ukraine. According to the analysts, Putin is exaggerating the potential of the Russian military-industrial complex while underestimating the economic power of Ukraine's Western partners. The US and its allies certainly must make choices when considering spending the large sums required to support Ukraine, but the choices they face are nothing like as hard as those confronting Russia. The balance of overall available resources and industrial capacity is decisively weighted toward the West. Russian military-industrial potential is, in fact, hopelessly outmatched by Western military-industrial potential. The researchers are pointing out that the US GDP alone is 10 times the size of Russia's, while Germany, the UK, and France together have economies nearly 5 times the size of Russia's. Therefore, Putin's claims are not supportable. During the interview, Putin said that while Western countries will send 400 tanks to Ukraine, Russia will have time to manufacture or modernize more than 1,600 tanks. The Institute is doubtful of this claim. The capacity of Ural Vagon Zavod, the only tank plant in Russia, is about 20 units per month. It would take 6 years for Russia to fulfill this order at the current rate. Given the international sanctions and the lack of skilled labor, it is unlikely Russia can expand production enough to fulfill the task set by Putin by the end of the year. Finally, the researchers pointed out that Russia has reportedly been losing 150 tanks per month and therefore would need to produce 1,350 tanks in the next 9 months merely to remain at current levels. This is not accounting for a possible increase in tank losses, as the Ukrainian military and its Western backers can confidently expect that loss rates in tank duels between M1s, Leopards and Challengers on the one hand, and T-55s, T-62s or even T-72s on the other will be far from a balanced 1-to-1. The US military, after all, has repeatedly demonstrated the relative effectiveness of M1s and T-72s on the battlefields of Iraq. The Institute further looked at Vladimir Putin's announcement to deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus. Putin has likely sought to deploy Russian nuclear weapons to Belarus since before the February 2022 invasion of Ukraine, and has likely chosen this moment to do so in order to serve the immediate information operation he is now conducting, the report said. The researchers pointed out that Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko offered to host Russian nuclear weapons on Belarusian territory on November 30, 2021, and Belarus removed the constitutional clause enshrining Belarus' neutral status in a referendum in February 2022. Putin likely refrained from deploying the weapons to Belarus at the start of the 2022 invasion in order to preserve the option to deploy them as part of a future Russian information operation to manipulate the West, the researchers argue. The Institute believes that announcement of the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons to Belarus is irrelevant to the risk of escalation to nuclear war, which remains extremely low. Ukrainian and Western officials offered various views of the state of the Russian offensive in Bakhmut on March 25th, but all are consistent with the assessment that the Russian effort around Bakhmut is likely culminating. The researchers point out that Russian forces are likely to continue to attack Bakhmut even if the offensive has culminated, as culmination does not mean the absence of fighting. The analysts further argue that Russia most likely does not have the degree of fire control over Ukrainian ground lines of communication as claimed by Russian mill bloggers. Recent footage show Ukrainian convoys using several roads to Bakhmut despite Russian artillery targeting the vehicles. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy is concentrating its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marinka areas. Thanks to professional and coordinated actions, our defenders repelled more than 50 enemy attacks on them. On the territory of the Republic of Belarus, measures of combat training of units of the armed forces of the Russian Federation are ongoing. The enemy continues to maintain a military presence in the border areas of the Kursk and Belgorod oblasts. In the Liman direction, during the day, the enemy conducted unsuccessful offensive actions in the area of Sinkivka and Vesele settlements. In the direction of Bakhmut, the enemy continues its assault on the city of Bakhmut, as well as in the Ivanivske area of the Donetsk Oblast. In the Avdiivka and Marinka directions, the enemy carried out offensive actions in the direction of the settlements of Novokalinove, Avdiivka, Sieverne, Pervomaiske, and Marinka. There was no success. The enemy continues defensive actions in the Zaporizhzhia and Kherson directions. The Russian invaders continue to suffer huge losses. This forces them to set up their hospitals on the territory of civilian medical institutions. Thus, in the village of Novovasilivka, Priazovsky district, Zaporizhzhia Oblast, the Russian occupying forces used the local hospital as a hospital. The Russian invaders continue to suffer huge losses. This forces them to set up their hospitals on the territory of civilian medical institutions. Thus, in the village of Novovasilivka, Priazovsky district, Zaporizhzhia Oblast, the Russian occupying forces used the local hospital as a military hospital. As of March 25th, about 200 wounded Russian invaders are being treated there. Access to the medical facility is prohibited for civilian population. And with that, the report is finished. If you're interested in any of the details to the articles I mentioned and want to read up on the details, you can find links to them in the description. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. I hope you will join me again tomorrow. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.